In the shadowy corridors of London's Hargrave Museum, an ancient curse awakens as the unopened sarcophagus of a lost Egyptian princess is revealed. Museum owner Charles Hargrave and his team are plunged into a nightmarish realm where dreams and reality blur. Each night brings haunting visions of being trapped in a spectral burial chamber, haunted by the mummified princess seeking to claim their souls. As team members start to mysteriously die, Charles must race against time to uncover the secrets of the hieroglyphs and break the curse. With suspenseful twists, chilling encounters, and a battle against an ancient force, this tale of terror and desperation will leave you on the edge of your seat, wondering who will survive the curse of the princess. Dive into this gothic horror story where the past's deadliest secrets are unearthed and survival hangs in the balance. Chapter 1. The Arrival. In the heart of London, under the grey, brooding sky, the Hargrave Museum stood, like a sentinel guarding the relics of the past. Its stone facade, weathered by time, whispered tales of forgotten eras and lost civilizations. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old books and ancient artifacts. The museum, a labyrinth of history, was the life's work of Charles Hargrave, its enigmatic owner. On this particular morning, an air of excitement buzzed through the corridors of the museum. Today, a new exhibit was to arrive, one that had caused a stir in the academic world, an unopened Egyptian sarcophagus, rumoured to hold the remains of a lost princess. The whispers of her story had travelled across continents, from the dusty dunes of Egypt to the cobbled streets of London, igniting imaginations and curiosity. Charles stood in the main hall, his eyes reflecting the gleam of anticipation. He was a man of medium build, with a countenance that bore the marks of countless hours poring over ancient texts and artifacts. His hair, once as black as the raven, now showed streaks of silver, and his hands were etched with the fine lines of meticulous work. The sound of heavy wheels and the clatter of hooves announced the arrival of the sarcophagus. Charles hurried outside, where a horse-drawn carriage stood, draped in heavy canvas. The delivery men, gruff and weather-beaten, carefully maneuvered the large crate down the ramp. It thudded heavily onto the cobblestones, sending a shiver through Charles's spine. With great care, the crate was brought into the museum and placed in the centre of the main hall. The air was thick with dust and expectation as Charles signed the delivery papers, with a hand that trembled slightly, not from age, but from excitement. As the delivery men departed, Charles stood alone with the crate. The museum was silent, save for the faint echo of London's hustle and bustle outside. He circled the crate, his eyes tracing the ancient hieroglyphs that adorned its sides. The symbols spoke of royalty, of the afterlife, and of curses, the usual fare of ancient Egyptian tombs. But there was something else, a sense of urgency, almost as if the hieroglyphs were trying to convey a warning. With a deep breath, Charles signalled his assistants to begin the process of opening the crate. The sound of prying wood filled the hall, each creak and crack resonating like a chord of ominous music. Slowly, the sarcophagus was revealed, a magnificent piece of ancient craftsmanship, adorned with gold and lapis lazuli, the face of the sarcophagus carved in the serene, enigmatic visage of the princess. Charles couldn't tear his eyes away from it. The princess's face, though carved in stone, seemed to possess a life of its own, her eyes gazing into the distance, her expression one of eternal slumber. There was a beauty to it, but also a profound sadness, as if she had been robbed of her destiny. As the last rays of the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the hall, Charles knew that this sarcophagus was more than just another exhibit. It was a portal to a past that was shrouded in mystery and legend, Little did he know that it would soon become a gateway to a realm beyond his wildest imaginations. A realm where the boundaries between the living and the dead, the real and the surreal, would blur into obscurity. That night, as the moon cast its pale light over London, Charles left the museum with a sense of unease he couldn't shake off. The sarcophagus had been unveiled, and with it, something ancient and restless had been awakened. Ah, my dear nocturnal scholars of the macabre. It's time for a quick scare break. As we linger in these shadowy realms, a small favour I dare to ask. If my tales of terror bring you thrills, do not let our journey end here. Hit like, subscribe, and join our dark congregation. Now shall we delve deeper into the abyss. Let's embrace the darkness once more. Let's get back to the shadows. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Dark. The night had fallen heavily over the city, draping everything in a cloak of darkness. In his quaint home, nestled in the heart of London, Charles Hargrave tossed and turned in his bed, his mind unable to escape the haunting image of the Egyptian princess's sarcophagus. The excitement of the day had given way to a restless unease, an ominous prelude to the night's descent into a world of shadows. As sleep finally claimed him, Charles found himself in the throes of a vivid dream. He was locked inside the sarcophagus, his body rigid and confined within the ancient casket. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each second an eternity, as he lay there in the suffocating darkness. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of ancient spices and death. He could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on him, the silence of the tomb a deafening roar in his ears. Then, suddenly, the lid of the sarcophagus was opened from the outside. Light flooded in, blinding and disorienting him. With great effort, Charles pushed himself out of the sarcophagus, his limbs heavy and uncooperative. He found himself in a burial chamber, but it was unlike any he had seen before. The walls were adorned with hieroglyphs and paintings, but they seemed to shimmer and shift as if not quite real. The chamber felt confined to its four walls, beyond which nothing seemed to exist, like a ghostly replica of a burial chamber suspended in an abyss. As he regained his composure, Charles noticed a doorway in the far wall. It was dark and foreboding, an invitation to the unknown. His heart pounded in his chest as he took a step towards it. That's when he heard it. A shuffling noise, like the sound of someone dragging their feet across stone. The noise grew steadily closer, echoing through the chamber, sending chills down Charles's spine. He stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the doorway, as the shuffling grew louder, closer. His mind raced with fear and curiosity, wondering what spectre from the past was approaching. But just as the entity seemed about to emerge, Charles was jolted awake by the shrill cry of a night bird outside his window. The next morning, Charles returned to the museum, his mind still haunted by the dream. As he walked through the halls, he noticed a peculiar atmosphere among his staff. They all seemed unusually tired, their eyes shadowed and their movements sluggish. One by one, they confided in Charles, their voices low and tinged with unease. Each of them had experienced disturbing dreams the previous night, dreams that left them feeling drained and anxious. The realization hit Charles like a wave. All of those who had been involved in opening the sarcophagus had been afflicted by the same restless night. A sense of dread settled over him. The sarcophagus wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a vessel, a conduit to something ancient and unknown. And now it seemed they had all been drawn into its dark embrace. The museum, once a sanctuary of history and learning, now felt like a stage set for a haunting play. The sarcophagus, its ominous centerpiece. As Charles pondered over the day's discoveries, he couldn't shake off the feeling that the events unfolding were just the beginning of something much more sinister and inexplicable. Chapter 3. The Curse Unveiled. The morning light filtered weakly through the high windows of the Hargrave Museum, casting long, sombre shadows across the ancient exhibits. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust, but also with a palpable sense of foreboding. Charles Hargrave and his team gathered around the sarcophagus, their attention focused on the hieroglyphs etched into the stone. Tension hung in the air as they worked tirelessly, deciphering the ancient script that had remained a mystery for millennia. The museum was silent, save for the occasional rustle of paper and the soft scratching of pencils on notepads. Then, suddenly, a breakthrough. "I've got it," exclaimed Matthew, one of the younger members of the team, his voice cutting through the stillness. The others gathered around, their eyes wide with anticipation. Matthew's hands trembled slightly as he translated the inscription aloud.
"We opened the sarcophagus, but she came for us all in the night. The last of us have reburied her in the hope we may survive. Should you find her in the future, do not open. She will come for you to maintain her life beyond life."
A heavy silence fell upon the group as the gravity of the words sunk in. They exchanged uneasy glances, each recounting their own haunting dreams from the previous night. The realization that they might have unleashed something far beyond their understanding was chilling. The day wore on, heavy with the weight of the discovery. The team worked in a daze, their minds preoccupied with the ominous warning. One by one, they left the museum as evening approached, each lost in their thoughts, the fear of the night ahead looming over them. As night enveloped the city, Charles found himself alone in his home, the haunting image of the sarcophagus burning in his mind. He tried to dismiss the fears, to rationalize what they had uncovered as mere superstition. But as sleep overtook him, he plunged once again into the nightmare that had begun to plague him. He was trapped in the sarcophagus, the darkness suffocating, the passage of time and endless torment. Then, as before, the lid was opened from outside. Charles climbed out, his heart pounding, into the ghostly burial chamber. The walls shimmered with an ethereal light, the hieroglyphs dancing before his eyes. This time, the dream took a terrifying turn. As he stepped out of the sarcophagus, he heard a blood-curdling scream. Turning towards the source, he caught just a glimpse of one of his team members, their face twisted in terror, being dragged into the dark doorway by an unseen force. The sight was so shocking, so visceral, that Charles could not move, could not scream. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, he was startled awake, his heart racing, sweat beading on his forehead. The scream still echoed in his ears, a haunting reminder of the nightmare that had felt all too real. Lying in the dark, Charles knew that they had disturbed something ancient and vengeful. The curse of the princess was no longer a legend. It was a terrifying reality that had begun to manifest, and now they were all entwined in its deadly grasp. Chapter 4. The Missing Link. The morning sun did little to dispel the gloom that had settled over the Hargrave Museum. The staff arrived in a state of weariness, their faces etched with the signs of another night, plagued by unsettling dreams. But there was a more pressing concern that morning. Andrew, the team member Charles had seen in his nightmare, was nowhere to be seen. Charles tried to shrug off his anxiety as he greeted his staff, but the absence of Andrew was like a dark cloud hanging over them. He made a few attempts to contact him, each call echoing out into the void with no response. His concern growing by the minute, Charles finally decided to call the police, his voice tinged with a sense of foreboding as he conveyed his fears. The police were initially skeptical, but the earnestness in Charles's voice and the strange circumstances surrounding the sarcophagus compelled them to act. They sent a team to Andrew's residence, a quaint house tucked away in a quiet London suburb. As the police approached the house, they noted the stillness that seemed to envelop the property. There was no sign of movement, no indication of the usual hustle and bustle of daily life. They knocked, but there was no answer. After a few tense moments, they decided to force entry. The scene that greeted them was one of chilling stillness. Andrew was found in his bed, his eyes wide open in terror, his face frozen in an expression of horror that seemed to transcend mere fear. It was as if he had seen something beyond the realm of understanding, something that had shocked his very soul into stillness. The news of Andrew's death hit the team like a physical blow. The terror that they had all been feeling, the nightmares that had plagued them, suddenly became all too real. They were no longer dealing with mere superstitions or legends. Something malevolent had been awakened with the opening of the sarcophagus, and now it was claiming them, one by one. The museum, once a place of fascination and discovery, now felt like a tomb, the sarcophagus its ominous centerpiece. The team gathered around it, their faces pale, their eyes reflecting the hair that gripped their hearts. They had unleashed something ancient and vengeful, and now they were paying the price. Charles stood amongst them, his mind racing for answers, for a way to put an end to the curse that had befallen them. But as he looked at the sarcophagus, at the serene face of the princess carved in stone, he realized they were dealing with powers that were beyond their understanding, powers as old as time itself. As night began to fall, a sense of dread settled over the museum. The shadows seemed to grow longer, the silence more oppressive. They all knew that the coming night would bring more nightmares, more terror. But what they didn't know was who would be the next to face the wrath of the princess's curse. Chapter 5. Desperate Measures. Exhausted and fraught with dread, Charles tried in vain to resist the pull of sleep, but as the night deepened, his defenses crumbled, and he succumbed to the inevitable. The dream, now a nightly terror, unfolded with horrifying predictability. This time, another member of his team was dragged towards the ominous doorway in the spectral chamber. In desperation, Charles followed, his movements hindered as if by an invisible force, his progress agonizingly slow. Reaching the entrance of the narrow corridor, he witnessed a sight that chilled him to the bone. The princess, shrouded in bandages, her movements both graceful and horrific, was dragging his colleague into the consuming darkness. In a fleeting moment, they disappeared into the void, leaving Charles in the oppressive silence of the chamber. Struggling against the unseen current, he tried to advance down the corridor, but it was like wading through a dense, resistant tide. A voice, ancient and cold, whispered through the darkness, "Your time will come," sending shivers down his spine. He awoke with a start, his heart pounding, the echo of the voice still lingering in his ears. At the museum, the atmosphere was heavy with despair and fear. The team member he had seen in his dream was absent, confirming the nightmarish reality they were all facing. "This can't be," Charles muttered in disbelief. With only 2 other team members remaining, they gathered, their expressions a mix of fear and determination to find a solution. One of the members, Sarah, suggested a desperate course of action. "Maybe we need to shut the sarcophagus up, like in the writing," she proposed, her voice tinged with a mix of hope and uncertainty. They decided to act on the idea, hoping against hope that it would break the curse. With solemn determination, they meticulously placed everything back into the sarcophagus as it was found, their movements reverent and cautious. The lid of the sarcophagus was then closed, sealing the princess once more in her ancient tomb. The finality of the action was met with a heavy silence, each of them holding their breath, half expecting some immediate sign of their fate. In a decision born of mutual fear and solidarity, they agreed to stay at the museum overnight, keeping a watchful eye on each other as they slept. They arranged makeshift beds in one of the exhibit rooms, the sarcophagus in view, its presence looming over them like a silent sentinel. As the night closed in, the museum took on a surreal quality, the shadows of the exhibits casting strange, elongated forms across the walls. The team lay in the dim light, each lost in their thoughts, the fear of sleep hanging over them like a shroud. But there was a glimmer of hope, a faint light in the darkness of their situation. Perhaps the act of sealing the sarcophagus had appeased the princess's spirit. Perhaps the nightmare was over. As they drifted into an uneasy sleep, watched over by the silent witnesses of history, they clung to this hope, praying that the dawn would bring an end to their torment. Chapter 6. The Final Confrontation. The museum was bathed in the eerie light of the moon, casting long, ominous shadows across the room, where Charles and his remaining team members sought refuge. He had taken the first watch, allowing the others to sleep. The silence of the museum was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old building settling. Charles's eyes were fixed on the sarcophagus, its presence looming over them like a silent judge. As the hours ticked by, Charles's mind raced with thoughts of the curse, the dreams, and the fate that had befallen his colleagues. His eyes grew heavy, but he fought the pull of sleep, knowing the dangers that lurked in the shadows of their dreams. Suddenly, he noticed one of his team members, Emily, beginning to stir restlessly in her sleep. Her movements grew more frantic, her breathing labored and panicked. Charles rushed to her side, trying to wake her, but she was lost in the throes of her nightmare. Turning to the other team member, at Daniel, Charles's heart sank as he saw him too, thrashing violently in his sleep. In a panic, Charles shook them, calling their names, trying desperately to rouse them from their nightmares, but it was too late. They both suddenly went still, their bodies collapsing lifelessly onto their makeshift beds. A chilling realization washed over Charles. He was the last one left. As he stood there, paralyzed with horror, the room began to distort and warp around him. The walls of the museum faded away, replaced by the ghostly stone walls of the burial chamber. He was no longer in the museum. He was inside the spectral chamber, the realm of the princess. The shuffling sound filled the chamber, echoing ominously off the walls. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Charles's heart pounded in his chest as he saw her, the princess, decayed, mummified, a terrifying visage of death. "It's your time now," she rasped, her voice a haunting whisper from the grave. As she shuffled towards him, Charles felt an overwhelming sense of powerlessness. But then, a glimmer of an idea sparked in his mind. The sarcophagus. It was the key. It had started this nightmare. With a surge of adrenaline, Charles rushed to the sarcophagus and grabbed the lid. He lifted it with all his strength, slammed it shut with a forceful crash. The impact echoed through the chamber, a crack appearing on the wall of the ghostly burial chamber. The princess let out a cry of pain, her form wavering. Emboldened, Charles repeated the action, lifting the lid and smashing it down upon the sarcophagus again and again. Each impact caused another crack to form in the walls of the chamber, the light from an unnatural source shining through the fissures. The princess fell to the ground, writhing in agony. "Stop!" she cried, her voice filled with pain and despair. The light from the cracks grew brighter, more intense, the chamber shaking as if it were about to collapse. Charles, driven by desperation and the will to survive, continued to smash the lid of the sarcophagus. The cracks in the walls widened, the light blinding. He could feel the grip of the curse loosening, the power of the princess waning. As the chamber crumbled around him, the light engulfing everything, Charles held onto the hope that this nightmare would finally end, that the curse of the princess would be broken once and for all. With one final resounding crash, the sarcophagus shattered and the light exploded, enveloping Charles in its blinding embrace. The walls of the ghostly burial chamber crumbled around Charles, the very fabric of the spectral dimensions unraveling. The princess, who had once been a figure of terror, now lay defeated on the floor, her mummified body, a symbol of an ancient and relentless curse, began to disintegrate, turning into the dust of centuries past. As her form faded, the oppressive aura that had enveloped the chamber dissipated, a sense of finality hanging in the air. In an instant, the world shifted around Charles. The phantom chamber vanished, replaced by the familiar surroundings of the Hargrave Museum. He was back, the nightmare seemingly over. His eyes turned to the sarcophagus, now a shattered relic. Inside, where the princess had once laid in eternal rest, was nothing but dust. The ancient curse born from her restless spirit had been broken, its hold on the living world severed. But the victory was bittersweet. Charles's gaze fell upon his two fallen team members, Emily and Daniel. They lay motionless, their faces still etched with the terror of their final moments. A deep sadness washed over Charles, the weight of his inability to save them heavy on his heart. They were victims of a curse that had extended its malevolent reach across time, claiming those who dared to disturb the princess's rest. As he stood there, amidst the remnants of the ordeal, Charles reflected on the events that had unfolded. The sarcophagus, an artifact of immense historical significance, had also been a vessel of untold power. It had not just been a tomb for the princess, but a conduit for her spirit, a bridge between the worlds of the living and the dead. In their quest for knowledge and discovery, they had unwittingly unleashed an ancient force, one that demanded a high price for its disturbance. The curse of the princess was a testament to the mysteries and powers that lay hidden in the artifacts of the past. It was a reminder that some things, shrouded in the sands of time, are meant to remain undisturbed. The sarcophagus had held not just the remains of an ancient princess, but a legacy of her unfulfilled destiny, her rage against the passage of time, and the loss of her kingdom. In the aftermath, the Hargrave Museum became a place of solemn reflection. The sarcophagus, now a pile of rubble and dust, served as a poignant reminder of the ordeal they had endured and the lives that were lost. Charles, forever changed by the experience, dedicated himself to honoring the memory of his colleagues, ensuring that their sacrifice would not be in vain. As the sun rose over London, casting its light on the museum, Charles knew that the world of ancient artifacts would always be shrouded in mystery and wonder, but he also understood the need for respect and caution when delving into the secrets of the past. The curse of the princess had been broken, but its lessons would live on. A whisper in the halls of the Hargrave Museum, a reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the echoes of history. In a whirlwind of ancient mysteries and modern dangers, the resurrection ritual begins with Ethan and Lara, a couple with a love for the arcane, unwittingly acquiring a book at an auction, a book that is none other than a copy of the fabled Egyptian Book of the Dead. Their discovery draws the attention of a secretive cult, worshipping long-forgotten deities, leading to Ethan's tragic demise. In her heart-wrenching quest for vengeance, Lara deciphers the book's dark secrets, performing a forbidden ritual to resurrect Ethan. But what returns is not the man she loved, but a vengeful entity caught between life and death, embarking on a supernatural journey of retribution. As the ancient powers of the book unleash, Lara faces a harrowing choice that could alter the very fabric of reality. Dive into a tale where the boundaries of life, death, and love blur, and every turn is a step into the unknown. Chapter 1: The Mysterious Acquisition. In the dimly lit hall of the Ancient Artifacts auction, the air was thick with anticipation. Among the eclectic crowd of collectors and historians, Ethan and Lara, a young couple with a penchant for the mysterious and old, stood out with their infectious enthusiasm. They were an unlikely pair in such a gathering. Ethan, a tall man with a quiet demeanor, and Lara, vivacious and inquisitive, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Their attention was fixed on a peculiar lot that was about to be auctioned. It was a collection of various artifacts, but one item in particular caught their eye. A book with intricate designs, its cover adorned with strange symbols and hieroglyphs. "Ethan, look at this," Lara whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. "It looks ancient, maybe even Egyptian." Ethan nodded, equally intrigued. As the auctioneer announced the lot, the couple exchanged a determined glance and raised their paddle, bidding cautiously at first. The competition was surprisingly sparse, and soon they emerged victorious, obtaining the lot for a modest sum. As they approached to claim their purchase, a stranger emerged from the shadows. He was a tall man with an intense gaze and a certain air of urgency. He zeroed in on the book in Lara's hands, his eyes widening with a mix of recognition and greed. "I'll offer you 10 times what you paid for that book," he said abruptly, his voice low and urgent. Ethan and Lara exchanged a puzzled look. The offer was tempting, but Lara's grip on the book tightened. "No, thank you," she replied, her curiosity piqued. "We're quite fond of our purchase." The stranger's eyes darkened. 100 times then?" he insisted, his tone more demanding. "You don't know what you're dealing with. That book is not just a collector's item." But Lara, with a mix of defiance and intrigue, shook her head. "We appreciate the offer, but we'll keep it." The stranger lingered for a moment, his gaze lingering on the book with a mix of longing and fear. Then, without another word, he vanished into the crowd as mysteriously as he had appeared. As Ethan and Lara left the auction, the book safely in their possession, they felt a thrill of excitement, unaware that their lives were about to take a dark and irreversible turn. The Book of the Dead, as they would soon learn, was more than just an ancient relic. It was a gateway to a world they never imagined, and they had just opened the door. Ah, my dear nocturnal scholars of the macabre, it's time for a quick scare break. As we linger in these shadowy realms, a small favour I dare to ask. If my tales of terror bring you thrills, do not let our journey end here. Hit like, subscribe, and join our dark congregation. Now shall we delve deeper into the abyss. Let's embrace the darkness once more. Let's get back to the shadows. Chapter 2. Unveiling the Shadows. In the comfort of their cosy study, filled with shelves of books and antiquities, Ethan and Lara sat at their large oak desk, the mysterious book open before them. The room was bathed in the warm glow of a desk lamp, casting long shadows on the walls lined with bookshelves. Ethan, with his analytical mind, was the first to break the silence. "This isn't just any book, Lara. Look at these symbols. They're similar to those in the Egyptian Book of the Dead." Lara leaned in, her eyes wide with fascination. The Book of the Dead. Isn't that the ancient Egyptian guide for the deceased to navigate the afterlife?" "Exactly," Ethan replied, flipping through one of their reference books. It was a collection of spells, charms, and secrets meant to guide the souls of the dead through the underworld, protecting them from harm and guiding them towards the afterlife. "But this," Lara said, gesturing to the book in front of them, "it doesn't look like a mere copy. The craftsmanship, the details, it's extraordinary." Ethan nodded, absorbed in thought. "There's a legend among historians, a tale of a scholar from a strange occult who was obsessed with the afterlife. They say he painstakingly copied pages from the original Book of the Dead, infusing them with his own dark interpretations and rituals." Lara's eyes sparkled with a mix of fear and excitement. "You think this could be that book, the scholar's version?" "It's possible," Ethan said cautiously. "If it is, it could be incredibly powerful. The original Book of the Dead was not just a guide, it was believed to hold the keys to life and death, to control the very fabric of the afterlife itself." Lara shivered, the gravity of their discovery settling in. "So, if someone were to understand and use this book, they could potentially manipulate the forces of life and death," Ethan finished, his voice trailing off. The room suddenly felt colder, the shadows darker. They both looked at the book, its ancient pages seeming to hold secrets far beyond their understanding. The thrill of discovery was now tinged with a sense of foreboding. Unknowingly, Ethan and Lara had stepped into a world where the lines between life and death blurred, and they held in their hands a key to powers that were never meant for mortals to wield. Chapter 3. The Abduction. The morning sun cast a warm glow through the windows of their home, but Lara was barely aware of it, her entire focus on the ancient book laid out before her. She was determined to uncover its secrets, her mind racing with possibilities. Ethan, on the other hand, decided to head into town to gather some supplies, leaving Lara absorbed in her research. Ethan's drive was usually peaceful, a route he had taken countless times before. However, today was different. As he cruised along the quiet country road, he noticed 2 cars in his rearview mirror, approaching at an alarming speed. Before he could react, the cars flanked him, their aggressive maneuvering forcing him off the road. His car spun out of control and crashed into a tree with a deafening thud. Dazed and confused, Ethan tried to gather his senses. His vision blurred. He saw several figures emerging from the cars. They were clad in long, dark robes, their faces obscured under hoods. They approached with a menacing, purposeful stride. As they reached the car, Ethan protested. "What is this? Who are you?" But they offered no response. Instead, one of them struck him on the head, and his world went black. When Ethan regained consciousness, he found himself in a dark, musty room, strapped to a chair. His head throbbed with pain, and his eyes struggled to adjust to the dim light. He was surrounded by about 10 robed figures, their faces still hidden, standing in a semicircle around him. Then a tall, dominating figure stepped forward. The man's voice was deep and resonant as he demanded, "Where is the book?" "My book." Ethan's heart raced. He had no idea how to respond, his mind racing with fear and confusion. The man seemed to sense his bewilderment, and with a swift motion, pulled back his hood, revealing his face. Ethan gasped in horror. The man's face was that of a living mummy, wrinkled, ancient, and with eyes that burned with an unnerving intensity. "I am the author of that book," the man declared, his voice laced with a mix of pride and malice. "I have been searching for it for many years. It holds powers that you cannot begin to comprehend, and it belongs to me." Ethan, still reeling from the shock, realized the gravity of the situation. Lara was alone at home with the book, unaware of the danger they were both in. The man before him was no ordinary human. He was something far more ancient and terrifying. Ethan knew he had to find a way to warn Lara and protect her from the unimaginable threat that they had unwittingly unleashed. Chapter 4. Flames and Shadows. Lara's worry deepened as the hours passed with no sign of Ethan. His absence was unlike him, and her attempts to reach him on his phone only led to the unnerving tone of an unanswered call. Deciding to take matters into her own hands, Lara grabbed her keys, her eyes catching a glimpse of the mysterious book on the table. On impulse, she snatched it up and took it with her, a sense of urgency propelling her forward. She drove through the town, searching the familiar streets and shops, but Ethan was nowhere to be found. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the empty roads, each moment stretching her anxiety thinner. As Lara turned to the corner towards their home, her heart sank. Flames engulfed the house, with fire engines and firefighters frantically trying to quell the blaze. Ethan's car was parked outside, ominously still. Lara raced towards the chaos, her screams for Ethan lost amidst the roar of the fire and the shouts of the fire crew. Hours later, as the fire dwindled to sullen embers, the firefighters emerged with a stretcher. The sight of Ethan's burned and charred body was more than Lara could bear. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed in grief. Through her tears, she noticed several figures standing apart from the crowd, robed and hooded, their presence sinister and foreboding. After the firefighters had confirmed Ethan's death, Lara followed the ambulance to the morgue. She was allowed a few heart-wrenching moments to say goodbye to her beloved husband. His once warm and loving face was now unrecognizable, sending a fresh wave of sorrow through her. Leaving the morgue, Lara headed to her sister's house for refuge, but she soon realized she was not alone on the road. In her rear-view mirror, a car lurked in the darkness, its driver shrouded in a hood and robe. Panic gripped her. The robed figures from the crowd were following her. In a desperate attempt to evade her pursuer, Lara drove into a busy section of the city, weaving through traffic and taking abrupt turns. Her heart pounded as she glanced back, relieved to see the car falling behind. Finally, she ditched her car in a crowded parking lot and made her way on foot to a nearby hotel, her steps quick and furtive. Once in the safety of her hotel room, Lara's grief was overshadowed by fear and determination. She pulled out the book, the cause of all their miseries. Under the dim hotel room light, she began to delve into its pages, seeking answers and perhaps a way to avenge Ethan. The ancient hieroglyphs seemed to dance before her eyes, holding secrets that were both terrifying and alluring. Lara knew that her journey had only just begun, and the path ahead was fraught with danger and dark revelations. Chapter 5. The Illuminated Passage. Lara, hunched over the book in her dimly lit hotel room, felt the weight of her limited knowledge in hieroglyphs. Each symbol was a cryptic puzzle, a gateway to understanding she desperately needed to unlock. Determined, she began to take pictures of the pages with her phone, hoping to use online resources to assist in the translation. As she scrolled through the images, one particular page caught her eye. It appeared to be faintly glowing in the camera's image. Unlike its appearance to the naked eye, intrigued and slightly unnerved, Lara focused her attention on this page, trying to decipher the strange luminosity that her phone had captured. In an attempt to understand the glowing hieroglyphs, Lara used an app on her phone that translated ancient scripts. To her amazement, the app was able to recognize and translate some of the symbols on the glowing page. It was as if the book itself was responding to her urgent need to comprehend, revealing its secrets to her through the lens of modern technology. As she pieced together the translations, Lara's heart raced. The page detailed a ritual for returning the dead to the world of the living. But this was no ordinary resurrection. The text spoke of returning them with immense power, endowing the revived with abilities far beyond those of mortal beings. It was a ritual of transformation, of crossing the boundary between life and death, and emerging changed, more powerful. Lara's mind raced with the implications. Could she really bring Ethan back? And if she did, what would he become? The thought of seeing Ethan again, of reversing the cruel fate that had befallen him, consumed her. Yet, the fear of the unknown, of unleashing something beyond her control, gnawed at her conscience. With a mix of trepidation and determination, Lara began to study the ritual in detail, memorizing the required incantations and preparations. The symbols seemed to leap off the page, embedding themselves in her mind. She knew that what she was contemplating was fraught with danger, but the burning desire for vengeance and the chance to see Ethan again overpowered her fears. The night deepened around her, but Lara was oblivious to it, lost in a world of ancient magic and modern technology, standing on the brink of a decision that could alter the very fabric of life and death. Chapter 6. The Chase in the Night. Exhaustion was creeping over Lara as she pored over the ancient text, her mind swirling with glyphs and incantations. Suddenly, a faint noise from outside jolted her back to reality. Peering through the window, her heart sank. The robed figures, the same sinister presence from the crowd, had found her. Shadows danced menacingly as they congregated around the hotel. Panic set in. Lara knew she had to escape without being seen. She gathered the book and her belongings, moving cautiously in the dark room. As she attempted to slip out, the robed figures materialized from the shadows, surrounding her. Their chants of the book, echoed ominously in the quiet night. Frozen with fear, Lara felt utterly powerless. But in that moment of despair, the flashing lights of a police car pierced the darkness. 2 officers stepped out, drawn by the commotion. Seizing the moment, Lara screamed for help. The officers, acting swiftly, pulled Lara towards the car, but before they could react further, the robed figures descended upon them, overpowering the unsuspecting policemen with surprising strength. Lara watched in horror as the officers were subdued, the chants of the book growing louder. In a desperate bid for escape, Lara slammed the door shut, locking it from inside. She dove into the front seat, her hands trembling as she found the keys still in the ignition. With a turn of the key, the engine roared to life. The robed figures pounded on the car, their faces twisted in fury and desperation. Lara floored the accelerator, the car lurching forward, narrowly escaping the clutches of the robed figures. Her heart pounded in her chest as she sped away, leaving the chaos behind in a cloud of dust. She knew she couldn't return to her sister's place, nor could she go back to her own home. She needed a safe space, somewhere she could perform the ritual undisturbed. With her mind racing, Lara abandoned the car in a secluded area and made her way to another hotel, one where she hoped she wouldn't be found. Checking in under a false name, Lara retreated to her room, her mind set on one thing: the ritual. She had the book, she had the knowledge, and now she needed the courage to see it through. In the quiet of the new room, Lara opened the book once more, the ancient text seeming to whisper to her in the silence. The time had come to bring Ethan back, no matter the cost. Chapter 7. Resurrection. In the dimly lit hotel room, Lara sat cross-legged on the floor, the Book of the Dead open in front of her. She had arranged the room as the book instructed, with candles flickering at each corner, casting dancing shadows against the walls. The air was heavy with the scent of incense, and an eerie silence enveloped the space. Lara began to recite the words from the book. The ancient chants and incantations flowed from her lips with surprising ease, as though the book, or some unseen force, was guiding her. Her voice grew stronger, more confident, as she repeated the forgotten words of power, her hands moving in deliberate, ritualistic gestures. As she chanted, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The air seemed to thicken, charged with an unseen energy. The candle flames flickered more intensely, casting an otherworldly glow. Lara felt a connection to something ancient and powerful, a force that transcended time and space. Meanwhile, in the morgue where Ethan's body lay, a miraculous transformation was unfolding. As Lara's chants reached their crescendo, Ethan's charred and lifeless body began to stir on the cold slab. Slowly, his fingers twitched, then his arms moved. With a sudden jolt, he sat up, the morgue's sterile air filling his resurrected lungs. Ethan's movements were deliberate, purposeful. He was driven by an unseen force, a will that was both his and not his. He wrapped himself in cloth, covering his disfigured face and body, remnants of the fire that had claimed his life. His eyes, once warm and kind, now burned with an otherworldly fire, a testament to the ritual's power. As he moved through the morgue, the staff on duty froze in shock and disbelief. They watched helplessly, unable to comprehend or react to the impossible scene unfolding before them. Ethan, or the entity he had become, paid them no heed. He moved with a singular purpose, guided by a sense of knowing instilled by the ritual. Ethan made his way out of the morgue, his steps echoing in the silent corridors. He was drawn to the location where he had been taken when he was kidnapped, a place etched into his resurrected consciousness. He moved through the night, a spectre of vengeance, a mummy reborn with a mission to fulfill. The lines between life and death had been blurred, and Ethan was now a creature of both worlds, embarking on a path of retribution and justice. Chapter 8. The Confrontation of Eons. Ethan, his figure shrouded in cloth, stood at the entrance of a foreboding, clandestine location. With a forceful pound on the door, a worried man cautiously opened it. Upon seeing Ethan's disfigured face, the man, sensing something otherworldly, silently allowed him to enter. Inside, Ethan found himself in a grand sanctum, where the living mummy, the author of the book and the orchestrator of his abduction, stood waiting. The room was adorned with ancient Egyptian artifacts and symbols, a testament to the mummy's centuries-old obsession. The mummy, startled by Ethan's presence, exclaimed, "What is this? How can you be here?" He scoffed, his voice dripping with arrogance. "No matter. You do not possess the power to stop me. I have lived for centuries. You are nothing to me." Ethan slowly lifted his head, his eyes meeting those of the mummy. In a moment of transcendental transformation, his face began to change, morphing into the visage of the Egyptian god of judgment, Osiris. "If I were merely me, that would be true." Ethan spoke with a voice that was not his own, echoing with the authority of a deity. The sanctum fell into a stunned silence as the true nature of the confrontation became clear. Osiris, the god of the afterlife and judgment, had been pursuing the mummy for centuries. The mummy had once been a high priest who had cheated the scales of Ma'at, the concept of truth and balance in ancient Egyptian belief. By manipulating the Book of the Dead, he had escaped his rightful judgment and had been evading the gods ever since. Osiris, through Ethan, explained the gravity of the mummy's transgressions. In ancient Egyptian belief, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If the heart was found wanting, the soul was condemned. The mummy, in his quest for immortality, had tipped the scales in his favor, an unforgivable sin in the eyes of the gods. The mummy, now face to face with Osiris, realized the gravity of his situation. His centuries of evasion had finally caught up to him. He had used the Book of the Dead not just to extend his life, but to elude divine retribution. But now, standing before Osiris, he understood that there was no further escape. In the hallowed chamber, a battle of cosmic proportions unfolded. It was not just a confrontation between Ethan and his abductor, but a reckoning, centuries in the making, between a god of judgment and a mortal who had defied the natural order. The sanctum, once a place of dark rituals, became the stage for divine justice, as the balance of Ma'at was finally restored. Chapter 9. The Final Choice. In the solitude of her hotel room, Lara sat in contemplation, the Book of the Dead open before her. The room was quiet, save for the soft flicker of candlelight. Suddenly, the air shimmered, and Ethan appeared before her, his form ethereal and translucent. "Lara," Ethan's voice echoed, gentle yet distant. "I cannot come back. The ritual you performed, it wasn't just about resurrecting the dead. It was about maintaining the balance of life and death." Lara looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and despair. "But Ethan, I did this for you, to bring you back." Ethan shook his head, a sad smile on his lips. "Using the book to bring me back would tip the scales of the natural order. It would unleash chaos and imbalance in the world. Our reunion, as much as I desire it, cannot come at such a cost." He paused, his gaze intense and earnest. "Lara, you must become the keeper of the book, or its destroyer. But know this, destroying the book will lead to your own destruction. However, if you choose to do so, we can be together once more, in the afterlife." Lara's heart raced as she processed his words. The magnitude of the decision before her was overwhelming. To keep the book meant guarding a powerful and dangerous artifact, a responsibility that could consume her life. To destroy it meant sacrificing her own existence for a chance to reunite with Ethan. As Lara grappled with her choice, the ethereal images of Ethan and Osiris stood over her, waiting, a silent testament to the gravity of her decision. The scene shifted to the sanctum, where the mummy man lay lifeless on the floor. His heart, removed from his chest, sat heavy on a set of scales, tipping it decidedly against the feather of Ma'at. The balance had been restored, but at a great cost. Lara, sitting alone in her room, was left to ponder the weight of her decision. The fate of the book and her own destiny hung in the balance. The choice she would make remained uncertain, a final page yet to be written in the story of the Book of the Dead. In the heart of the Egyptian desert, hidden beneath layers of shifting sands, lay the tomb of Amenhotep, a pharaoh whose name sent shivers down the spines of those who whispered it in the moonlit night. Legend spoke of a curse that guarded the mummified remains of the once mighty ruler, a curse that transcended time and punished any who dared disturb his eternal slumber. One fateful day, an ambitious archaeologist named Dr. Victor Harrington set his sights on uncovering the secrets buried within the tomb's ancient walls, ignoring the warnings of locals and scoffing at the notion of curses. She assembled a team of experts and embarked on an expedition into the heart of the unforgiving desert. As the excavation progressed, the air grew thick with an otherworldly tension, and an eerie silence enveloped the dig site. The team brushed off their unease, blaming the oppressive heat and isolation. But as they uncovered the burial chamber, a palpable sense of dread settled upon them like a suffocating shroud. The moment the archaeologists laid eyes on the sarcophagus of Amenhotep, a chill ran down their spines. The lid, adorned with intricately carved hieroglyphics, seemed to bear witness to centuries of pent-up fury. Dr. Harrington, undeterred by the ominous atmosphere, ordered the removal of the lid. As the last seal was broken, an unearthly wind howled through the chamber, extinguishing torches and plunging the team into darkness. Whispers of an ancient language echoed through the air, and the temperature plummeted. Panic gripped the hearts of the archaeologists as shadows danced on the walls, taking form in the shape of a long-forgotten pharaoh. Amenhotep, once wrapped in linen and surrounded by treasures, now rose from his eternal slumber, a grotesque fusion of desiccated flesh and tattered burial wrappings. Hollow sockets glowed with an ethereal light as he fixed his gaze upon the intruders. The curse unfolded with a vengeance. Unseen hands gripped the hearts of the archaeologists, squeezing the life from them. The air filled with agonized screams as each member of the team succumbed to an unseen force. Dr. Harrington, paralyzed with terror, watched in horror as her colleagues crumbled to the cold stone floor, lifeless. Amenhotep, now free from his tomb, roamed the cursed excavation site, his footprints echoing through the silent desert night. Driven by an insatiable thirst for vengeance, he pursued Dr. Harrington, his spectral form casting an elongated shadow that seemed to consume all in its path. The once proud archaeologist fled through the winding tunnels, haunted by the relentless pursuit of a mummified pharaoh. The air itself seemed to conspire against her, whispering the secrets of the curse that now bound her fate to Amenhotep's wrath. In a desperate attempt to break free, Dr. Harrington stumbled upon a forgotten chamber, adorned with warnings etched in the very stone. As she read the ancient hieroglyphics, realization dawned. The curse could only be lifted by returning Amenhotep to his resting place and seal the tomb once more. With the mummy closing in, Dr. Harrington, guided by the flickering light of a dying torch, raced to reverse the desecration. As the lid of the sarcophagus closed, an otherworldly force lashed out, demanding a toll for the disturbance. The desert swallowed the cursed tomb, leaving only whispers of a cautionary tale among the shifting sands. The once silent wind now carried the echoes of Amenhotep's wrath, a chilling reminder to those who dared defy the sanctuary of the ancients' resting place. The mummy's curse endured, woven into the very fabric of the desert night, where the boundary between the living and the dead became blurred, and the whispers of the pharaoh's vengeance lingered for an eternity. And if you're still looking to fulfill your thirst for more horror, don't forget to check out this next video. Unless, of course, you are frozen with fear already.